They said the woman's true name had been stolen long before, traded away with her freedom and her voice. But among the enslaved, in whispers carried under breath, she was called Anaya. The name meant nothing to the master, but to those who watched her move in silence, it was a word that clung like smoke, fragile, yet impossible to scatter. On the far edge of a crumbling plantation, beneath a Mississippi moon swollen and pale as a blind eye, she bent low among the cotton rows, her figure nearly invisible against the night. The overseers mocked her quietness. They said she had never once cried out, not even when the whip carved its rivers into her back. To them, it was unnatural. Pain was supposed to make sound, but Anaya's silence unnerved them more than screams ever could. To the other enslaved, she was less a woman than a shadow. Her scars were maps of cruelty etched deep into flesh, and yet her gaze, when it flickered up, seemed carved from something older, harder, something that did not break. She slept with her face turned to the wall, never speaking in dreams, never shifting in chains. Some whispered she was already gone. Her soul departed long before, leaving behind a vessel of skin and silence. But the land itself knew otherwise. The cicadas in the trees sang louder when she walked past, then fell abruptly quiet, as if holding their breath. The ground beneath her feet seemed to thrum faintly, listening. She was not empty. She was waiting. Beneath the cellar stones where the air stank of damp earth and rot, something stirred in the cracks. A scorpion, patient as the grave, its curved tail poised like a sickle, its body gleaming in the faintest candlelight. It had hidden there long before Anaya arrived, but now it seemed restless, as though sensing her presence. The master saw only labor when he looked at her, a body to command, a possession to exhaust. He did not see how her silence thickened the air, how the night bent closer when she passed. He could not imagine that the stillness he mistook for obedience was a storm coiling in the dark. The others felt it, though. The enslaved glanced at her with both reverence and fear, unsure whether her silence was human endurance or something deeper, something that belonged to spirits and earth. And so, under that swollen moon, the fields hushed. The overseers laughed at her bent shoulders, but the land itself was listening. The storm had not yet begun. Somewhere in the cellar's cracks, the scorpion lifted its tail, waiting for the moment when silence would finally break. The night was heavy, swollen with heat. The cicadas screamed their endless hymn from the trees, and even the hounds lay restless in the dirt, panting beneath the moonlight. Inside the big house, the master was drunk on wine, his face flushed and gleaming, his voice booming against the walls as if the earth itself were his servant. Pride clung to him like sweat. He called for water, his tone sharpened with impatience, and his words struck the night like a whip. The overseer did not move. None of the men in the room did. The master's summons was not meant for them. It was meant for her. Anaya. She appeared in the doorway without a sound, her bare feet carrying her across the creaking floorboards. She moved slowly, her head bowed, her shoulders curved in submission, or perhaps in calculation. In her hands, she carried the clay jug, cool from the cellar. Within it, water shimmered like glass, the only mercy the night could offer. But mercy was not alone. Something else stirred in the shadows of a jug, a dark shape coiled, waiting. A scorpion, drawn from the cellar stones, hidden among the cool clay. Its tail curved upward, restless, its body a glimmer of venom in the flickering candlelight. Anaya saw it first. Her hand paused, just enough for time to breathe. She could have tipped the jug aside, brushed the creature away, saved the man who had crushed her voice 1,000 times before. She could have chosen mercy, but she did not. Her hand steadied. The jug tilted. The water spilled into the cup, a stream of silver beneath the flame. Her eyes never rose, yet something in her silence grew sharp, like a blade unseen but felt. The master laughed as he took the cup, his teeth glistening, his voice dripping arrogance. He never noticed the stillness in her hands. He never questioned the hush that fell across the room. He only raised the cup to his lips, unaware of the sting waiting in the dark. The others watched from the shadows, their breath caught in their throats. They knew something was about to shift, though none could name it. And when the master swallowed, the water cooling his tongue, the scorpion moved. It was in that moment, when Mercy died in Anaya's hands, that legend first drew breath. The moment unfolded with the swiftness of lightning and the cruelty of fate. As the master tipped the cup and swallowed deep, the scorpion lunged from its hiding place. Its body clung to the rim of clay, its stinger flashing once in the candlelight before sinking into flesh. The sting was silent, almost delicate, but the venom it carried was fire. The cup shattered against the floor as the master roared, clutching his hand. His laughter cracked into a scream that tore through the rafters, shaking the hounds in a frenzy outside. His swollen face twisted, first in disbelief, then in agony, as he stumbled backward, knocking the chair to the ground. Anaya did not move. Her bare feet held fast against the boards, her hands folded loosely in front of her. Her eyes, pale, hollow, unblinking, watched him as though she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. He cursed her name, though she had never given him one. He demanded she save him, his voice breaking into ragged pleas. He clawed at the earth, kicking, gasping, foaming with venom. "Help me," he rasped, as if help were something he had ever offered her. His body convulsed, writhing like a snake struck by its own poison. From the shadows beyond the door, the others pressed themselves against the walls. They had heard screams before, from lashes, from chains, from torches, but this was different. This was not the sound of punishment. It was the sound of reckoning. They dared not breathe too loudly, for even their silence felt dangerous in this moment. If he lived, they knew, his vengeance would rain down upon them all with fury unmeasured. But if he died, the world would not remain the same. Either way, the night had turned, and no one would walk out untouched. The master's eyes bulged as he staggered, saliva dripping from his lips, his words dissolving into incoherent cries. He reached for Anaya, his fingers clawing the air, but she did not move to meet them. She stood just beyond reach, a shadow fixed in place, her silence heavier than chains. For years he had demanded her voice, her body, her labor, her very soul. But now, at the threshold of death, she gave him nothing. No word, no cry, no prayer. Only silence. The venom was already in his blood, and still she did not move. Her silence filled the room, thicker than smoke, heavier than death itself. By morning, the house no longer belonged to silence. It belonged to whispers. They coiled through the halls like smoke, spilling into the quarters, carried on nervous tongues that dared not speak too loudly, yet could not remain still. Some said Anaya had bewitched the scorpion, that she had called it forth with a whisper only creatures of the earth could hear. Others murmured she had struck a bargain with the devil himself, trading her soul for vengeance. None could agree on the truth, yet all agreed on one thing. The sting had not been an accident. The master lay twisted in his bed, his body swollen, his skin blotched and blistered as though fire burned beneath it. His lips foamed, his breath rattled like a dying bellows. Servants came and went with bowls of herbs, wet cloths, and prayers whispered half in fear, half in desperation. But nothing cooled his fever. He cursed in fits, thrashing against his sheets, then fell into shivering silence, so still it seemed he had already crossed into death. And Anaya, the one they said was cursed, had been dragged down to the cellar. Shackled to the damp stone wall, torchlight flickered across her face. Yet she did not cry, nor beg, nor call for mercy. She sat in stillness, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the shadows pooling across the floor. Chains rattled when she moved, but her eyes were steady, unreadable. To some, this calm was proof of her guilt. To others, it was proof of something more dangerous, power. The overseers gathered in tight circles, their voices low but urgent. If the master died, who would inherit the land? If she had truly summoned the scorpion, what else might she command? And worst of all, what would happen if word of this reached beyond the fields, into the towns, into the courts of men who feared witches as much as they feared rebellion. The enslaved, too, spoke in hushed tones. Some believed Anaya's silence was no longer human silence, but the silence of spirits, the silence of earth and storm. Others trembled, fearing her presence would bring punishment upon them all. They avoided her name, yet their eyes could not stay away from the cellar door. The day dragged on, thick with heat, the sound of cicadas rising and falling like a fevered chant. Inside the house, the master groaned. In the cellar, Anaya closed her eyes. The question lingered in every mouth, every heart. Was she victim or witch? 3 nights passed, and the master's cries grew weaker, dissolving from screams into a rasping moan that rattled through the house like wind through hollow bones. His body darkened with bruises, the venom etching its curse across his skin in blotches of purple and black. Sweat soaked the mattress until it stank of sickness, until even the flies refused to leave. He called for God, for mercy, for salvation, but the words fell back into his mouth as bile. The overseers lingered outside his chamber, their boots restless against the boards. They argued in hurried whispers. Some believed the man would rise again and demand blood for this betrayal. Anaya's blood, and perhaps theirs, too, for failing to keep order. Others feared he would not rise at all, and then the plantation would collapse into ruin, the fields abandoned, their own lives stripped of meaning. They spoke not of justice, not of the enslaved who bent beneath their whips, but of inheritance, of property, of chains. Always chains. And in the darkness of the cellar, Anaya waited. The torchlight above her had burned out, leaving her in near blackness, save for the faint glow that slipped through the cracks of the door. Her wrists were raw from iron cuffs, her back pressed against stone. Yet her breath was calm, her silence unbroken. In that dark, her mind traveled backward. She remembered the nights when the master pressed her into the dirt, his weight crushing her ribs, his laughter muffling her screams. She remembered the whip, the iron, the smell of fire when her skin split beneath it. She remembered how mercy had been stolen from her long ago, not once but countless times. Every blow, every order, every theft of her body had been mercy's death. And so now, when the venom burned in his veins and his voice cracked into pleading, she felt nothing. No pity, no forgiveness. Only a terrible calm that spread through her like still water before a storm. Yet even calm can crack. From outside the cellar door, whispers reached her ears. The others, her kin in chains, pressed close, their voices trembling as they begged her to speak, to deny, to utter even one word of defense. They feared what punishment would come if she remained silent. If the master died, all their backs might pay the price. But Anaya did not answer. Her silence was heavier than the iron that bound her. Her silence was the answer. Above her, the master coughed blood into his sheets, and the house trembled with his failing breath. By the 6th night, the plantation house had fallen into a silence, so heavy it seemed the walls themselves were holding their breath. The master no longer screamed, no longer begged. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, each breath rattling like dried corn husks in the wind. The venom had finished its work. At dawn, a final cough shook him, wet and red. His eyes rolled white, and then they fixed on nothing. The sheets, soaked with sweat and blood, clung to his stiffening frame. The master who once commanded fields, flesh, and fire, lay broken, still, and forever silent. When the overseers discovered the body, fear passed through them sharper than any whip. For a heartbeat, none dared to speak. Then the storm began. Accusations flew like arrows, curses spat, threats promised. The scorpion bite, they said, was no accident. No faute. It was witchcraft. It was rebellion. And the name that fell from their tongues was the same, Anaya. The cellar door was torn open. Rough hands dragged her into the blinding light. Chains rattled against stone, biting into her wrists as she stumbled. Her eyes had not seen the sun in days, but when they adjusted, she did not lower her gaze. She looked straight ahead, past the overseers, past the wide-eyed slaves who dared not move. A storm was gathering above them, clouds rolling black over the fields. Wind whipped the cane, bending stalks as if the earth itself bowed before what was coming. In the courtyard, they threw her down upon the dirt where dogs were usually chained. The men circled her, spitting words of vengeance. They spoke of punishment worse than death, of making her an example of fire and iron. One held the branding iron in his fist, red from the coals. Another spoke of ropes, another of the whip. Each word a weapon, each voice feeding the frenzy. But the others watched in silence. The enslaved, her people, stood at the edges of the courtyard. Their eyes flickered, some with fear, some with sorrow, some with something deeper, unspoken. None spoke her name aloud, but it trembled on their lips like a prayer they dared not release. Anaya did not flinch. She stood, battered and bound, but with her back straight. The wind lifted her torn dress, carrying the smell of rain. She did not plead for life, nor beg for mercy. Her silence mocked them more than any word could. The first drops of rain began to fall as the overseer raised the iron above her skin. They bound her to the post at the center of the courtyard, the same post where men had been lashed until their flesh tore, the same post where women had been broken into silence. It had smelled of old blood and smoke. Rope cut into her wrists, pulling her arms wide as if the earth itself demanded she be displayed. The overseers stood in a circle, their faces slick with sweat and rage. One clutched a torch, its flames snapping in the wind. Another pressed the branding iron deeper into the coals until it glowed a furious red. Their eyes gleamed with something close to fear, though they masked it with cruelty. For they had seen their master rot from within, his body swallowed by venom. In the pit of their hearts they wondered, was this woman truly human? Or had something older, darker, taken root inside her? The others gathered, barefoot in the mud, eyes wide. Mothers held children close. Men kept their heads low, though their gazes betrayed them. They watched not with pity alone, but with awe, as though they sensed they were about to witness something that would never be forgotten. The torch moved closer. The kindling at Anaya's feet crackled as sparks leapt into the air. Flames licked the edges of the wood, hungry, eager. The overseers shouted curses, calling her witch, devil, serpent. They demanded she confess, demanded she cry out, demanded she give them the sound of her fear. But Anaya only raised her head. Her eyes met the sky, heavy with storm clouds that pulsed with silver veins of lightning. Wind tore through the courtyard, whipping hair across faces, rattling shutters, carrying with it the smell of ash and rain. The fire took, climbing the logs, heat pressing against her skin. Children cried out. Women turned their faces away. The overseers grinned, their rage pouring into the flames. Then the heavens broke. Rain fell in sheets, hard and sudden, drumming against wood and stone, drowning the fire before it could rise. Sparks hissed and died in the mud. The torch sputtered uselessly. The overseers cursed, kicking at the soaked kindling, trying to reignite what the storm had already claimed. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Some fell to their knees, whispering prayers, others crossed themselves. To them, there was no doubt. The storm had chosen her. The fire would not consume her. The heavens themselves had shielded her from their wrath. Anaya did not speak. She did not smile. But her silence was a crown, and in the eyes of those who watched, she was no longer flesh and bone. She was a myth, and myths do not burn. When the storm passed, she was gone. Some swore the ropes had snapped beneath the rain. Others whispered the earth had opened and swallowed her whole. No body was ever found. No trace of her remained on the courtyard stones, but the faint scorch marks of a fire that never lived. The overseers searched the fields, the swamps, the cane, calling her name with fury. But their voices only carried into the night, unanswered, swallowed by the trees. Fear lingered in their bones, for they knew the master had died, cursing her silence. And now that silence lived on, untouchable, unbroken. Among the enslaved, her absence was not despair, but transformation. They spoke her name in hushed tones, Anaya. The syllables tasted like freedom, like vengeance wrapped in shadow. Mothers told their children never to leave cups uncovered at night, for she would send the scorpion to crawl where cruelty lingered. Men whispered that she walked through the swamps, barefoot and scarred, carrying the storm in her breath. Women prayed that her silence would one day return as a voice, their voice. And so the stories grew. Some said she was seen near the riverbanks, her pale eyes glowing in the moonlight. Others swore they heard her chains dragging through the cane fields long after midnight. There were whispers that she could still the breath in a cruel man's throat without lifting a hand, that the storm itself bent to her will. The overseers tried to erase her, forbidding her name, forbidding her story. But the more they silenced the tongues of the enslaved, the louder the legend grew in the dark. For a name once spoken in secret cannot be buried. It lives like embers in ash, waiting for the wind. Years later, long after the plantation had rotted into ruin, travelers swore that when the air grew heavy and masters grew thirsty, their cups would tremble. And in the bottom of those cups, in the shadows of clay jars, scorpions would wait, coiled and ready. They said Anaya sent them. They said she never left. And when thunder rolled across the Mississippi night, when rain struck the shutters with fists of fury, the people would fall silent and listen. For in that silence, in the space between the thunder's roar and the storm's breath, they swore they could hear her still, the whisper of a woman who never begged, never broke, never burned. Anaya. Her silence walks where fire dies. Her scars glow when lightning splits the sky. And somewhere, beneath the roots, the scorpion waits in the jar.